Let's start with Lincoln's second inaugural. How did he seek to offer consolation to a divided nation in the midst of an awful, awful civil war?
I think Lincoln understands, as he gets up to give the second inaugural in March 1865, the Union armies are pressing in upon Richmond. The Civil War will be over in 2 or 3 weeks. And he's already turning his mind to what his second term will have to do, which is to bind up the nation's wounds and bring together two communities that have been at each other's throats and inflicted horrendous slaughter on each other for the previous 5 years. And he understands the critical problem here, which is that both sides believe that God was on their side. His problem is not merely the grief and anger caused by the conflict, but the enduring sense of righteousness on both sides, on the defeated side, on the victorious side. Both worship the same God. Both believe that God was on their side. And he has to find a way to get them, to pry them off that belief, because as long as they hold on to that belief, they will never be reconciled to each other. And so he astonishingly reaches to Psalm 19. And in Psalm 19, you know, there's this line about the ways of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. And the point about the Psalm, as Lincoln uses it, is to say this: you don't get to know what side God is on. You don't get to know. That's not for human beings. It's an extremely important moment in politics because it says, here below on earth, where I, Abraham Lincoln, have to work, we don't get to know whose side God is on. So we have to work in the obscurity and the humility of the human condition. And that, he says, creates the basis upon which, if we both accept this, if we both accept that no one's ever going to know which side God was on, that creates the possibility for us to bind up the wounds of help the widow and the orphan with malice towards none and charity towards all, the concluding lines of the speech. And it's the greatest speech in politics. I mean, it's the greatest attempt to understand that politics is a secular business, in my view. He uses powerful religious language to convey the message that the condition of politics is that you don't know which side God is favoring. And you have to live in a community in which there is this uncertainty. It's deeply respectful of religion, but it says we have to create a space here down below where we reason as blind, limited human beings struggling to find the right. And that's why I can read this speech any number of times and still feel chills up my spine.
That was a speech that offered malice towards none, but you write in your book that we seem to be living in a time where we hold malice towards all. And I wonder whether you think it's ever going to be possible, well, ever's a long time. How about in the next couple of decades? Are we ever going to get back to a time where we might be closer to malice towards none rather than malice towards all?
That's the $64,000 question, Steve. I mean, I think we are in a period of very deep and self-righteous polarization in which we associate our beliefs with our identities. So it's not just, it's not just I'm a liberal. I mean, I believe liberals possess the way, the truth, and the light, or I'm a conservative and I believe conservatives possess the way, the truth, and the light, or I believe that, liberals are this dark conspiracy that is, leading our country over the abyss. All this kind of language is just foreign to me and crazy and extremely destructive of politics. And I think it's arisen, let's be honest, because we're very divided. Canada's very divided. The ecological and climate change issues are sundering the country. The Aboriginal issues are sundering the country. We are struggling our way through COVID. We are struggling with deep and unprecedented inequalities. And all of this is fracturing the common ground. So I think a realistic estimate is we've just got to keep the show on the road and just try and hold it together until we get to calmer and more peaceful waters. And when the water is calmer, then polarization declines. But polarization is there not because people have suddenly gone crazy, but because there are real problems, real divisions, real inequalities that are tearing people apart. And that's why our politics is as polarized as it is. And so there's plenty of malice. And again, the reason that I find Lincoln so moving is that he understands this so deeply and is saying, the one thing we have to do together is stop thinking we have exclusive possession of the truth here. That's for God alone. And we are not gods. We are humble human beings here on earth, constantly making mistakes, constantly fallible. And those people we oppose are our fellow human beings and fellow citizens, and we have to bind up the wounds together. And the stark reality of the Lincoln speech, however, is that he gave it in 1865, and the Civil War that he thought was coming to an end a couple of weeks later is still ongoing. That's the terrifying or the sobering reality of this speech, that we are still not listening to Lincoln. The Civil War is still not over. The racial conflicts in the United States are still, enormous progress has been made. I don't deny it, but there's still a visceral, deep sense of exclusion among Black Americans, a deep and visceral fear of Blacks on the part of white Americans. So the Civil War is not over. And that teaches us another gloomy lesson. It takes much, much longer than we ever imagined to heal, especially in politics.
Let's finish up with one last question on Lincoln, and that is, you've explained how he tried to seek consolation for a country in the death grip of a civil war, but I wonder about for himself personally. This is a man who lost a child. This is a man who watched his wife lose her mind. This is a man who fought the black dogs of depression most days of his life. How did he find consolation personally in all of that?
I don't know. I think he found, I think he came out of the Civil War with a deep sense that he'd done his duty. What was consoling is that he had done his duty. He had done the best he could. It's a rather grim, stoic, he had a wonderful sense of humor. He wasn't, he saw the humorous side of most things. But I think if you asked him what consoled him in the last weeks of his life, it was a sense that he was, that he'd done his duty. There's a wonderful, exchange where he sits with Mary, his wife, and they imagine going to Jerusalem. I think he imagined a future he never lived to see, traveling and being free of the duties of the presidency. But I think what kept him together was the sense that not only that he'd done his duty, but I think also, I hope he took some pride in the language he used, because it's the great language of American politics and of democratic politics, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. He defined what the battle was for and saw the battle to a conclusion. And that's something that only a handful of human beings that can ever say to themselves. And that is consoling, or I certainly hope it was for him.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.